Guys, we need to talk about the real Tim Walz. Plus, in the last couple weeks, the US economy has taken a serious nosedive. Iranians are trying to take out Donald Trump, and Pennsylvania won't have results on election night. We've got all this and more to talk about today. Welcome to episode 45. I'm Blake Watson, and this is We the Free. One of the best ways you can help our show, other than by sharing today's episode, is by picking up some We the Free merch at WeTheFreeShow.com. You can be the salt and light you're meant to be by wearing the Salt and Light shirt, or by sipping your coffee from the Salt and Light mug, or you can sport the God Bless America shirt and the We the Free crest tee. We've got stickers and a Smells Like Freedom candle, so check out our merch today at WeTheFreeShow.com. I know that I always ask you all to share, but what I care most about is your education. That's what I strive for every week. I want you to leave feeling educated and maybe entertained a little bit, but for the purpose of helping you to be better Christians, which in turn makes you better Americans. Right now, it's more important than ever that you speak. Don't just speak to people in your typical bubble, speak to people at the grocery store, the gas station. Talk to people face to face. Yeah, you can try to make your digital voice heard on social media, but nothing is more effective and beneficial than having real conversations with real people. I'll help provide you with the information you need to be confident in having these critical conversations right now because there's so much at stake. Why do I bring all of this up? Because we're seeing the same tactics roll out that we've seen in the last two elections. Fabricated news, censorship and suppression, and electoral fraud. We just saw Pennsylvania issue a statement this week that they won't have the election results on election day. In episode 37, How to Steal an Election, I fully explained the process of illegal ballot casting and fraudulent voter registrations all across the country. I guarantee you that the news of this Iranian hack on the Trump campaign leads to fabricated hit pieces on Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. But most importantly, just as we saw with Elon Musk's interview with Donald Trump, you're going to see all sorts of technological censorship. Remember the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop story in 2020? Remember the collusion between big tech and the Biden administration? In the last month, Google has been censoring search results regarding Trump's assassination. The point is, if we're going to make a difference in this country, in this election, we've got to resort to more traditional means, which are, frankly, the best means. That means talking to people. Word of mouth. As Christians, we're supposed to be prepared to do that anyway. But politically, with the opposition, you've got to bring the receipts, get creative, and think about ways to engage outside of big tech. I'm going to continue to do the work to arm you in this spiritual and political battle we're fighting. A few weeks ago, in episode 42, we talked all about the real Kamala Harris, as she's revealed historically and politically from her childhood to today in her vice presidency. What we learned is that Kamala Harris is a power-hungry politician and a wildly progressive revolutionary who will say and do anything for a higher seat, a higher office, to systematically dismantle that particular jurisdiction, which started with justice in San Francisco and ends with a vice presidency of the United States. Kamala Harris has been the vice president of the United States for more than 1,300 days. The economic turmoil, the crashing stock market, the very higher costs of everything, the global destabilization in the Middle East, Russia and Ukraine, China and Taiwan, Iran, and the relaunch of North Korea's nuclear program, the importation of tens of millions of illegal immigrants, which entails crime, gang members and violence, illegal drugs, and massive financial strain on public programs and the American people, and the advancement of modern racism and child exploitation and gender confusion. Every single bit of this is because Kamala Harris has been the vice president for 1,300 plus days. But it seems like most people have completely lost sight of this fact. Another thing that many have lost sight of is that Kamala Harris has already run for president once before, in 2019. She ran a terrible campaign, but more importantly, she expressed all the policy positions we know today. Universal health care, criminal justice reform, which means lax and lopsided justice, decriminalizing marijuana use, the Marxist socialist process of eliminating income inequality, drastically raising minimum wages, which is a business killer, environmental justice and the Green New Deal, which is the Marxist degrowth movement using the environment and nature as a vehicle for revolutionary change, LGBTQ+, so-called rights, and abortion so-called rights, both of which you won't find in your Constitution, voting so-called rights, which meant criminals and non-citizens get to vote, gun control and banning so-called assault weapons, which they've never been able to define, and of course, a pathway to citizenship for the millions and millions of undocumented immigrants. That's what she's already run on 5 years ago. That's what she inched ever closer to in the last 1,300 days as vice president. And it's what she'll continue to pursue if elected as president, but at breakneck speed compared to President Biden. Why? Because she's far more radical than he is. And I'm baffled by the number of people who are buying her policy reversal claims. Do you all honestly think she's going to flip on her own radicalism and the radicalism of the far left Democrats? Of course not. And I'll tell you how I know that. Tim Walz. Tim Walz, Kamala's pick for vice president, is all the evidence you need for her continued and entrenched radicalism. Listen to me very closely. Do not buy the fabricated hype behind this ticket. Don't believe the message of joy and hope and change like this is Obama in 2008. And you know what happened then? I told you their only campaign strategy will be lying. Lying about their political record, lying about their own policies, lying about Trump's policies, lying about the momentum of the campaign, lying about polling, lying about their failures, projecting them onto Donald Trump, taking credit for his successes, etc. Because if they tell the truth about their policies and their record, they know they won't win. It's what they're doing right now on the campaign trail. It's what they'll do in the debates next month. That's why we've had, artificially edited photos to make it look like large crowds are showing up to see them. That's why they're curtaining off large sections of arenas, because they can't fill them. I was surprised, and I'm sure you were too. I thought for sure that Kamala Harris was going to pick Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, to be her running mate. Shapiro is smart. He's a slick politician. He's popular and favorable with the majority of his constituents in this swing state of Pennsylvania. He's an expert deflector. He could have carried a lot of the intellectual weight that Kamala has no chance of demonstrating on the campaign trail. Like, he can give articulate answers to questions and speak in coherent sentences above a third grade reading level, unlike Kamala Harris. He would have added to the ticket in a formidable way on numerous fronts. But there's only one problem with Governor Shapiro. In case you haven't paid close attention to the news since last October, the leftists have decried a certain group of ancient heritage who they've labeled as genocidal and colonizers and occupiers, even though they are relentlessly attacked and persecuted and assaulted just for the simple fact that they are Jewish. And so is Josh Shapiro. And though he's your standard self-hating Jewish Democrat politician, that will never satisfy the anti-Semitic, bloodthirsty, radical wing of the Democrat Party, for which Kamala Harris is vying support. The allegedly leaked video of a local Pennsylvania politician announcing Governor Shapiro as the running mate was very likely intentional to test the radical waters. And this is because, as I've said, Josh Shapiro would have been a really smart choice for Kamala to form a solidly formidable opposing ticket to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Instead, we were all surprised to learn that Kamala Harris picked the governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, who is basically the Midwest equivalent of Governor Newsom in California and the disgraced governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo. But we should not be surprised, as you'll see today. Governor Walz is the exact sort of candidate we should have expected all along. Governor Walz is the same age as his running mate, Kamala Harris. They're both 68 this year. He was born and raised in Nebraska. He earned a Bachelor of Science in social science education from a state college there. However, it was during that time that Mr. Walz enlisted in the Army National Guard. He became a geography and social studies teacher in South Dakota, and then he moved to Minnesota in '96 to teach and help coach football. His National Guard service stretched over his teaching career. He was deployed overseas a few times, though he never saw military combat. That's something that he's lied about in his career for political gain. In fact, he quit just before being sent to combat in Iraq and Operation Enduring Freedom. He abandoned his battalion, and he retired from teaching in 2005 and 2006, respectively, to run for Minnesota's 1st congressional district, which he won. He served as a U.S. representative from 2007 to 2019. His Heritage Foundation Lifetime Liberty Score, which I've talked about often, was a 13 out of 100. 13 out of 100. Kamala Harris's score was 4 out of 100. She's the most radical congresswoman we've ever had. So Tim Walz, 13 out of 100, was also very liberal and tyrannical as a member of the House. You can go to heritageaction.com to see his entire voting record in his 6 terms as a representative. But long story short, in his 6 congressional terms, Tim Walz voted to spend exorbitant amounts of money, adding trillions to the national debt and neglecting fiscal responsibility for the American people. He voted against the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, the most significant tax reform since 1986, which made huge changes to the individual and corporate tax codes and eliminated Obamacare's individual mandate penalty. He voted against all of that. He voted against the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, which would protect the unborn by preventing abortions prior to 20 weeks when children can reportedly feel pain. He voted against a proposal to cut the EPA's funding. He voted against an amendment to prevent the Department of Defense from using funds to provide gender transitions to members of the military. He voted against a resolution which would have prevented federal funding for Planned Parenthood. He also voted against the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion and Abortion Insurance Full Disclosure Act of 2017. He voted against repealing Obamacare numerous times. He voted to include women in a military service draft in H.R. 5485. He voted for an amendment in 2016 which would have made it illegal for private businesses to discriminate or deny access or service to biological men who identify as women to use women's locker rooms and showers, bathrooms, etc. He voted to reauthorize the No Child Left Behind Act. He voted against reforming the Federal Reserve in 2015. That year, he also voted against the AMASH Amendment, which would lift an embargo on the U.S. exporting crude oil. He voted against repealing the death tax. He voted against freezing the DACA program. He voted against additional work requirements for SNAP and welfare recipients. He voted to eliminate America's ability to indefinitely detain terrorists from the likes of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban in 2013. He voted against the Keystone XL pipeline that year as well. He supported the war on coal. He supported net neutrality. He voted against the Prenatal Non-Discrimination Act of 2012, which would ban sex-selective abortions. And all of this is just from 4 of his 6 terms as a United States representative. But this is already plainly illustrating how horrifically destructive, restrictive, and tyrannical someone like this would be in a seat of high authority. And that's without us covering any of his gubernatorial record. Tim Walz has been the governor of Minnesota since 2019. And this is where things start to get really interesting. It's weird to think about it this way, but in a way, an official can have more authority as a governor than a congressman. I know that sounds funny, but just think about it. There's over 400 members of the House that share the responsibility together, and they have to work together with their peers and sometimes even their foes to pass legislation. Well, as a governor, you're at the top of the totem pole in your particular state. Think about how effective governors have been over the last 4 years or so. Ron DeSantis has been very effective for Floridians, more so than when he was a congressman. Governor Abbott has been able to do more for the state of Texas than, let's say, Ted Cruz has as a senator. On the flip side, you can see the same level of effectiveness from Governor Newsom in California and with Tim Walz in Minnesota. This is a really important idea that I'm trying to articulate because how does a man treat the power vested in him? Does he use it for the good of all his constituents? Or does he use power for himself, or maybe even a power group, a select group, which must be satiated? Well, let's consider Governor Walz's record. He was a super spender. Just as he was in Congress, he raised Minnesota's budget by 40% in 5 years. He raised taxes. That's a typical Democrat fashion. On his first day in office, he created a state-funded DEI council to help diversify the Minnesotan government. He codified abortion in Minnesota. Abortions are funded in that state by the taxpayers. He made the state an abortion destination and a sanctuary state for transgenderism, for which he's also signed into law protective rights. On that note, he installed tampon dispensers in boys' restrooms in the public schools of Minnesota. Every June, he marches in the pride parades. In fact, he had his own pride parade, which is weird. It was for his re-election campaign, at which he had kids dressed in rainbow colors spelling out his last name with giant letters on their shirts. He made it possible for illegal immigrants to obtain driver's licenses, and he restored voting rights for criminals and supports voting without identification. There's almost 90,000 illegal immigrants living in Minnesota, on record. And that may be because Walz's government allows them to vote, to drive, and they have access to free college and health care in Minnesota. He created a background check system for private gun transfers. He banned so-called conversion therapy, which means any sort of Christian counseling for same-sex attracted persons. He legalized marijuana. The state government of Minnesota is also riddled with fraud, embezzlement, and scandal. And Governor Walz is also mandating a carbon-free electrical grid in the next 16 years, which is an impossibility. However, the highlight of his gubernatorial career was in 2020. You remember the two most notorious happenings of 2020 in America, right? A global pandemic and race riots in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. Well, George Floyd died from his overdose in the presence of police officers in Minneapolis, which is the most populous city in Walz's state. Of course, the ensuing chaos, which could largely be blamed on Walz as the tipping point, has been forcibly swept under the rug by national media, who covered the burning buildings and violence and destruction as, quote, mostly peaceful protests. If you want a full view of the Black Lives Matter protests in Minneapolis alone, because they happened in cities all over the U.S., subject yourselves to a documentary called The Fall of Minneapolis. It will show you the whole truth of the issue, and it will also show you who Tim Walz is. This was his state. He had, as governor, the legal authority and obligation to put an end to the riotous destruction. But he did not. He could have utilized the National Guard, but he did not. He never even condemned it. He encouraged it in his complicity. He excused it with racial ideology platitudes and said things like the riots were the inevitable consequence of 400 years of the disparate treatment of blacks in America. He said, "The killing of George Floyd made us look at a reality that was always there, whether we didn't see it or we didn't want to see it." And by that, he's implying the inherent or systemic racism, which has its roots in the great sin of America, slavery, and the ensuing racism and segregation, which continues today in modified fashion. How does that justify the riots and mobs who justified their actions from a criminal overdosing in the presence of a racially diverse group of police officers? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. If I go off of the outspoken basis for Black Lives Matter, then the purpose was to capitalize on black victimization to create violent revolutions. Speaking of Derek Chauvin, it was Walz's fault that Chauvin did not receive a free and fair trial in Minnesota and allowed massive public pressure to be applied to force a prosecution. His wife, though, publicly pleaded with the incarcerated to apply for pardons. And what an incredible irony that Kamala Harris was publicly tweeting out requests for donations to bail out BLM riders for the Minnesota Freedom Fund at the same exact time. What do you know? I could say a lot more about that. But 2020 was also the onset of COVID across the U.S. There are few governors who could rival the tyranny and authoritarianism of Andrew Cuomo in New York and Gavin Newsom in California, but Tim Walz got pretty close. Stay-at-home orders were issued. Restaurants, bars, and other businesses were forced to close. When some were allowed to reopen, Walz put limits on capacity and forced safety protocols, which was the final nail in thousands of Minnesotan businesses' coffins. Gyms, theaters, salons, all shuttered. Churches were closed and restricted, a direct violation of the First Amendment. Just when things seemed to be easing off, restrictions and mandates were brought back and tightened 6 months into the pandemic. Walz issued a statewide mask mandate. Schools were closed and moved to online learning. Curfews were instituted and police were marched through the streets to shoot anyone outside, even on their front porch, with paintball guns. No, I'm not kidding. A COVID hotline was created so that Minnesotans could snitch on their neighbors for violating the rules. No, I'm not kidding. When unemployment benefits and relief payments were finally handed out, they were criticized for being too little, too late. Walz's racial politics and DEI measures extended to the distribution of therapeutics, as white Minnesotans were pushed to the back of the line so that minorities could be served first. It was literally a points-based system of prioritizing racial minorities over white people of any age or comorbidity. Perhaps worst of all, though, was Walz's treatment of his 87-year-old mother, who had heart surgery that year.
And this is what we do in my family, but we can't. My 87-year-old mother had heart surgery. We isolated her. Our goal was to bring her up here and live with us for a while. We can't bring her. So she is alone. We're dropping groceries at the door. We have to, because otherwise what that front page story is going to go on day after day after day.
So sweet and caring. And of course, all this was based on really credible science and sound logic. These are the countless reasons explaining the mass exodus of Minnesotans to various other states, like mine in Tennessee. Now, Tim Walz is also an out-of-the-closet, outspoken socialist. Worse than Bernie Sanders. He wants to also abolish the Electoral College because that's what the Democrats mean when they say democracy. And he wants to abolish the filibuster rule so that the Democrats can ram through their legislative agenda with zero resistance, because that's what the Democrats mean when they say democracy. Now, if you take all of the history, the facts and information from episode 42 about Kamala Harris and combine them with the history, facts, and information from this episode, episode 45, concerning Tim Walz, and you combine these two together, the result is the most radical, leftist, tyrannical ticket in the history of America. The problem is, there are too many people asleep. Too many are asleep to the facts concerning both of these candidates. Too many are asleep to the false enthusiasm and emotional hype of campaigning. Too many are asleep to the ignorance of policy. And that's because no one is talking about it. It's been nearly 3 weeks since Kamala Harris was undemocratically elected by Democrat elites to usurp Biden's run for the presidency, and she's not been asked by a single media member. Not a single media member has asked her one question. Not a single person has asked her about her record as a California politician or a U.S. senator or as vice president. No one is asking her about her current failed policies in the current administration. No one is asking Tim Walz the same questions either. Neither of them will do a debate on a centrist or a conservative network. And why? Why aren't they being asked any questions? Why are so many Americans asleep to these facts? Because the media is covering for them, so they never have to talk about what they hope to do, so they can smile their way into the White House and dismantle the country one executive order at a time. There's one other reason that Kamala is not being allowed to do any interviews, and that's because she's an idiot. Watch.
We've been to the border.
You haven't been to the border.
And I haven't been to Europe. And I don't understand the point that you're making.
Talking about the significance of the passage of time, right? The significance of the passage of time. So when you think about it, there is great significance to the passage of time.
Ukraine is a country in Europe. It exists next to another country called Russia. Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a powerful country. Russia decided to invade a smaller country called Ukraine. So basically, that's wrong.
So you're now no longer are you necessarily keeping those private files in some file cabinet that's locked in the basement of the house. It's on your laptop, and it's then therefore up here in this cloud that exists above us, right?
The Caribbean nations, island nations, in the Western Hemisphere. That is where the Caribbean is. We are also in the Western Hemisphere. They are our neighbors. I am here, standing here on the northern flank, on the eastern flank, talking about what we have in terms of the eastern flank.
I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been, you know?
Space is exciting.
It is time for us to do what we have been doing, and that time is every day. Every day it is time for us to agree that there are things and tools that are available to us to slow this thing down.
We will work together and continue to work together to address these issues, to tackle these challenges, and to work together as we continue to work.
Do you ban plastic straws?
I think we should. Yes. I mean, look, I'm going to be honest. It's really difficult to drink out of a paper straw when if you're just, like, if you don't gulp it down immediately, it starts to bend.
Yes.
And then, you know, the little thing catches it. And then, you know, so we got to kind of perfect that one a little bit more.
Do you know, okay, a bit of a history lesson. Do you know that the women's teams were not allowed to have brackets until 2022?
So the United States shares a very important relationship, which is an alliance with the Republic of North Korea.
AI is kind of a fancy thing. It's, first of all, it's 2 letters. It means artificial intelligence.
Harris and Walz are running a sham campaign. If you want to know what they would be like as president and vice president, hindsight is 2020. Why did Kamala Harris pick Tim Walz? Well, it should be obvious to you now, because birds of a feather flock together. There are 2 peas in an ideological pod. Kamala is not running for the moderates, and definitely not the conservatives. She can say she's running for all Americans as much as she wants, but selecting Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, which was the only state Reagan lost in 1984, proves that Kamala Harris plans to be the most radically progressive president we've ever had. The question is, how many people can we wake up before November? Well, I know one person who may have been awoken. In the last couple weeks, the global stock markets have tanked over concerns of our own slowing economy. Yes, the American economy is that important to the world. What caused this? A weak jobs report, which showed unemployment at its highest rate in 3 years. But what about all the jobs gloating and build back better? What happened? Well, there's something in economics called the SAM rule, S-A-H-M, which is an indicator based on historical data that we are headed into or we're in a recession. And to that, I would say, duh. Like, where have you all been for 4 years? Biden and Harris have made the worst possible economic decisions for our country, and now we're all getting to reap the great and inevitable consequences and benefits of it. The United States accounts for almost 25% of the global GDP. 25%, which shows you how powerful the United States is on the global economic stage. So that means that after the Dow Jones and the NASDAQ and the S&P 500 dropped around 3% in the aftermath of the jobs reporting, Japan's stock market dropped, European markets dropped, Nvidia, Alphabet, which is the company that owns Google, Meta, Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft, they all dropped. And stocks rise and fall every day, but never by this much. If you don't know anything about the American stock market, or let's do this. Let's specifically talk about like what happens at the New York Stock Exchange. This is one of the biggest stock exchanges in the world. It's a marketplace where stocks, which are ownership shares in companies, are either bought or sold or traded, etc. So our biggest American companies will list their stocks on the New York Stock Exchange to sell them in an auction type of market. And I'm not going to bore you with everything about stocks, but here's the point. The New York Stock Exchange is one of the key indicators of the health of the United States economy and the global economy. When stocks are up, the economy is healthy because more people want to buy stock. That is demand going up and the prices going up, and that's reflected in those percentage increases. If the stock market is down, the economy is unhealthy because more people want to sell their stocks. Supply goes down and prices go up. That is reflected in percentage decreases. So when bad news about the economy emerges, that encourages investors to sell their stocks because these things affect the value of their stocks. Last Monday, this is exactly what happened. Jobs were down, unemployment was up, earnings were down, and lots of investors sold. That's what led to a 1,000 plus point drop in the market. Now, here's why I share all this. The Biden-Harris economic policies have created this. They've created this turmoil, which, as you can see, doesn't just affect Americans, it impacts the entire globe. Well, theoretically, this should have a significant impact on the election. And here's CNBC's Jim Cramer reacting to the stock market freefall.
People surrounding Harris, if you're in the stock market, if you care about your paycheck, you go with Trump. If that's what you do.
You do?
Yeah, well, he wants to cut your taxes.
Oh, he wants to cut taxes.
Your taxes.
I love the juxtaposition of the numbers plummeting on his right as he tells people, hey, if you care about making ends meet and getting a paycheck, you should probably vote for Trump. The other guy was shocked. What do you mean, Jim? You want me to vote for the evil orange man? Have you lost your mind? No, actually, that's the most logical Jim has sounded in a while. And speaking of the evil orange man, here's what Trump had to say about the news. Stock market's crashing. I told you so. Kamala doesn't have a clue. Biden is sound asleep. All caused by inept U.S. leadership. Judging by the all caps lettering, it seems like Trump is yelling this, but he's nevertheless right. That this is caused by leadership. But I disagree that it's incompetence. I'm one of the few people that thinks that this is intentional, but that's a conversation for another day. Or you could just go watch episode 41, The Shot Heard Around the World. However, there's another interesting detail in this reporting, and that's the timeline for the unemployment. The jobs report showed that unemployment is the highest it's been since October 2021. That's about 8 months after Biden and Harris took office, which shows us and validates for us that all the job growth, all those numbers are not attributable to Biden-Harris policies. They're attributable to people just moving to other jobs or taking multiple jobs, or their rebound jobs from the historic job loss during the pandemic. Speaking of Trump and the election, I alluded to the Iranian hack on the Trump campaign earlier. The Associated Press is reporting, Iran is accelerating online activity that appears intended to influence the U.S. election, in one case targeting a presidential campaign with an email phishing attack, Microsoft said Friday. Iranian actors also have spent recent months creating fake news sites and impersonating activists, laying the groundwork to stoke division and potentially sway American voters this fall, especially in swing states. The findings in Microsoft's newest threat intelligence report show how Iran, which has been active in recent U.S. elections, is evolving its tactics for another election that's likely to have global implications. So let's pause right there a second. I want you to think about the candidates and their foreign policies. One side opposes Iran, and the other supports them. Literally. One side supports Israel more than any American administration ever. The other side has been undermining Israel for years across multiple administrations. Israel is the enemy of Iran. So With this engagement in the 2024 election, who in the world would Iranian hackers attempt to attack, and who would they want to collude with to win the election? Let's continue. The report doesn't specify Iran's intentions besides sowing chaos in the United States, though U.S. officials have previously hinted that Iran particularly opposes former President Donald Trump. U.S. officials also have expressed alarm about Tehran's efforts to seek retaliation for a 2020 strike on an Iranian general that was ordered by Trump. Write it down, folks. Make a note. I can smell a collusion story coming down the pike. Don't let the media or the leftists take this story and run with it. Donald Trump is the target, not the beneficiary. Keep reading. This week, the Justice Department unsealed criminal charges against a Pakistani man with ties to Iran who's alleged to have hatched assassination plots targeting multiple officials, potentially including Trump. Well, I'm sure that's just totally unrelated to the hacker stories. But, here you have someone on the terror watch list arrested in the United States who's alleged to have hatched assassination plots on Donald Trump and others. Wonder how he got here. The report also reveals how Russia and China are exploiting U.S. political polarization to advance their own divisive messaging in a consequential election year. Wait, stop. Hold on. You're telling me that Russia and China are getting in on this too? That is so weird. I wonder why. It's almost like they know who would be a threat to their power and expansionism. Look, we have the unique historic ability right now to examine the presidential records of both sides. Trump has already been in office. Harris has been in office for almost 4 years. We know how both of them have handled all these situations. We already know both of their foreign policies. We know for a fact that when Trump was in office, the Islamo-Nazi regime in Tehran was withering away. The Russians were sitting on their hands. The Chinese were cooling off and backing down. There was peace in the Middle East, and North Korea was shutting down their nuclear programs. Yet, while Harris has been in office, she's been a friend to all these dictators. At least in the sense of weakness and inactivity. And don't tell me the billions upon billions of dollars that we've given to Ukraine has accomplished anything. My point is, we all know who our enemies want in office, and it's not DJT. The Microsoft report said that as Iran escalates its cyber influence, Russia-linked actors have also pivoted their influence campaigns to focus on the US election, while actors linked to the Chinese Communist Party have taken advantage of pro-Palestinian university protests and other current events in the US to try to raise US political tensions. Iran's efforts seemed aimed at undermining candidates seen as being more likely to increase tension with Tehran, the officials said. That's a description that fits Trump, whose administration ended a nuclear deal with Iran, reimposed sanctions, and ordered the killing of the top Iranian general. Speaking of cheating in the election, one of the main sources of fraud in the prior election was the unconstitutional changing of the rules granted to a legion of Democrat attorneys across the country in the lead up to the 2020 election. What makes it unconstitutional? Because state legislatures are the only entities constitutionally allowed to determine election processes. They're the only ones. Democrat attorneys cannot force counties, etc., to change their election processes like tabulation time spans, acceptance dates, the mass mailing of paper ballots, the diminished threshold for signature verification, etc. This happened across the country, like in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was one of the handful of states which, on election night, were trending toward Trump. And then, suddenly, the tabulation was halted. When it returned and resumed the next day, almost 100% of the remaining votes were for Joe Biden. Well, Pennsylvania made the following announcement this week. Pennsylvanians won't always know the final results of all races on election night. Any changes in results that occur as counties continue to count ballots are not evidence that an election is rigged. That's crazy because Florida has 8 million more citizens than you. Texas has 16 million more citizens than you, and their results are all in on election night. I wonder how they do that. Why do they do that, though? Did you know that there was a law passed in 1845 which mandates the date of the election? Yeah, it's got quite the name. It's called, you ready for this? This is the title of the law. The Act to establish a uniform time for holding elections for electors of president and vice president in all the states of the Union. Whew, that's quite a mouthful. Well, let's take a look at the text. Be it enacted that the electors of president and vice president shall be appointed in each state on the Tuesday next after the first Monday in the month of November of the year in which they are to be appointed. So, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November was chosen specifically to avoid any religious conflicts or the end of harvest season. Nobody would miss church. But the point of this law was to ensure that every state decided their slate of electors for president and vice president all on the same day. Not on different days, not on multiple days, the same day, singular, which is the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. The law also states, when any state shall have held an election for the purpose of choosing electors, and shall fail to make a choice on the day aforesaid, then the electors may be appointed on a subsequent day in such manner as the state shall by law provide. In other words, if for whatever reason your electors are not chosen on election day, the state legislature gets to decide how that subsequent day is enacted. Pennsylvanians, listen to me. And if you're in one of the handful of states who stopped counting on election night, I'm talking to you in Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and so on. If your state or your county doesn't give you results on election night, file a lawsuit against them for violating the Act of 1854 or the Voting Rights Act. Both of those are U.S. law, or the Equal Protection Clause, which is from the Constitution. Look up the laws in your state. See how they were violated and if they're in contradiction to U.S. law or the U.S. Constitution. Make the case a matter of defrauding the voters, voter fraud or election fraud, and watch the cases skyrocket to your state's Supreme Court. Listen, it can't work on a national level. I wish it could, but it can't. It's not enough to say, well, they broke the law. Tennessee can't sue Pennsylvania and be granted legal standing without specific, direct evidence of injury to the state. It wouldn't work for a national legal group either. This is what happened to Texas in 2020. They sued the states of Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and the Supreme Court rejected the case because Texas was not able to demonstrate how the state of Texas suffered a specific direct injury from the way Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin conducted their elections. Texas claimed voter dilution due to alleged actions by other states. And that was just too abstract and indirect to satisfy the Supreme Court's requirements for standing. Texas offered a generalized grievance, but courts are generally reluctant to grant standing for generalized grievances shared by a large group or the public at large. But they expressed in their response that things should be settled state by state, which is federalism. What works is a Pennsylvanian in Pennsylvania suing his own state over voter fraud. Why? Because he's a voter in that state. He has legal standing. So y'all be ready on November 6th. I'm just telling you, Christians in Pennsylvania and Georgia and Michigan and Wisconsin, you have a moral obligation here. Be bold, be brave, and stand up against lawlessness. Speaking of Christians and the election, a new group has emerged online this week known as, get this, Christians for Kamala. Here's how they describe their mission. This is a hopeful movement of followers of Jesus who believe that empathy matters, that character counts, and that kindness is the better path. Wait, hold on a second. Then why are you supporting Kamala Harris? She's not empathetic to everyday Americans, and her character is horrific. Just ask Willie Brown's wife, or the people of California, or Brett Kavanaugh. She's not kind either. Just ask the vast majority of her staff who have quit from the tyrannical work environment she created, where she treated her staff like dogs. And that's been her entire professional career. And we're probably talking about people who have never once met Kamala Harris. They've just heard her give some stupid speech somewhere. And what they've really observed is the niceness, not the kindness, that she puts on as a show. Because we know what this woman is like behind the scenes. She's monstrous, and she's nothing like Jesus. Let's see what else they said. We are human beings of deep faith from every disparate corner of this nation who are tired of being defined by cruelty, exclusion, and hatred. In other words, we're the real Christians. Those other people aren't the real Christians because they're cruel and exclusive and hateful. Actually, if your faith was so deep, you would know that calling right, right, and wrong, wrong, and calling sin, sin, is not cruel, exclusive, and hateful. If you were the real followers of Christ, then you would obviously know that loving people like Christ means pleading with them to depart from that which will eternally separate them from God. Man, that God, he can be so exclusive keeping people out of heaven like that, huh? We proudly support Vice President Kamala Harris as she champions true Christian values embodied in the teachings of Jesus. Okay, y'all are going to have to pray for me. I'm going to try to get through this without losing it. Kamala Harris is a liar and a cheat. She's an adulterer. She punishes good and rewards evil. She's a habitual slanderer, a manipulator, a panderer, a bloodthirsty, power-hungry slave driver. Just watch my last 3 episodes and you'll see. It's not that she doesn't come close to Christian values. She champions the opposite. She runs opposite against them. They continue. Now more than ever, we need to bring our personal spiritual convictions to bear and to speak with our voices, our time, our resources, and our votes. Funny, I'm doing the exact same thing, but we're saying completely opposite things. That's funny, isn't it? Join us for a live online gathering of Christians looking to flip the script here and to push back the threat of Christian nationalism with our time and our treasure. Ah, there it is. It's Christian nationalism. Man, these people are so Christian, they don't want their country to be Christian. That's something. You know, I've actually done a whole episode on this subject. It's episode 31, The Battle for America's Identity. You need to go back and watch the whole thing, but one of the central points is that Christian nationalism is mostly a concocted caricature, a boogeyman by the left. And progressive Christians are falling for that. They're embracing it as well. Here's what the real Christians mean, and this is what I said earlier this year. Christians want to see the United States of America return to its Judeo-Christian roots. We want to see virtuosity return to public and private life. We want to see justice and order. We want to see respect and honor and reverence. We want to see an outright preservation of life, no matter what. We want to see honesty and integrity, safety for everyone. We want to see evil punished and the good rewarded. This is what we long for. And Christians are not alone in this. Even people who are atheists and agnostic and other faiths recognize the stability, prosperity, and harmony that stems from a Christian society. This year, one of the world's most renowned atheists just said as much. In other words, a lot of people would love to see the United States become a Christian nation again. But here's the difference between the majority of us and the fringe political caricature the Democrats and liberals speak of. We will never force Christianity upon anyone because it defies God-given liberty. That's exactly what the founders thought. Instead, we will use legal process, argument, and reasonable debate to establish a Christian nation, a city on a hill. And you can't prevent that from happening. Let me ask all of you this. How important is the evangelical vote in America? I mean, here you have this Christians for Kamala group. You have a largely Caucasian progressive Christianity group. Those are the so-called evangelicals. What about black evangelicalism? Last week, we combed through an article from Christianity Today, a puff piece written for Kamala Harris, describing the swelling support and enthusiasm from black Christians in America. If you missed that episode, go back and watch, and you'll see that the main concern of the article is Kamala's skin color. Policy doesn't matter. Record doesn't matter. Character doesn't matter. All that matters is her alleged ethnicity. Well, I found something that you have got to see. This is a montage of more than 50 black clergy. Listen to the striking similarities. And if you're listening on audio, I promise you that this is from over 50 different churches across America. Go.
I just want to read a couple statistics that have been done this week alone.
Just got information, if you've been watching, about how much money has been raised in such a short time.
These past 8 days, we have seen records in fundraising that the U.S. politics have never seen before.
Within 24 hours of President Biden's withdrawal from the election and his endorsement of Vice President Harris, grassroots organizations sprung up all over the country using Zoom and most social media to raise large sums of money in support of her.
Us as black people, we activated. There was a couple conference calls. I know I got invited to one and tried to get on, Ryan, and I couldn't even get on because it was just sold out. It was too many people. Zoom, get it together.
Over the exceeded limits of Zoom calls in terms of numbers. They had a meeting with the black women. They raised so much.
Black women got on the telephone lines on last Sunday night.
Sisters got on a call.
Black women got on a call with 44,000 black women.
It was black women, 44,000 participants.
Over 44,000 black women came together on a Zoom call.
What began with 4,000 black women rapidly grew into a formidable force of 44,000 on Zoom.
It was originally supposed to be only 1,000 black women, but you know, sisters speak in such a way that the internet can't keep up. And over 44,000 women showed up.
Sisters, if y'all was on that call last Sunday, make some noise.
Raised over $1 million.
I'm telling you, don't play with black women. They raised $1.3 million.
$1.5 million.
Raise $1.5 million.
1.5 million went up to $1.6 million.
Close to $2 million in just a few hours.
Inspired by our sisters, independent Zoom calls last week began with our brothers. Let's hear it for the brothers. Brothers got on a call.
Then the black men got on a call.
Black men were encouraged, got on a call the next night.
And not to be outdone.
The next day, black men, not to be outdone, came together.
Groups came up like Black Men for Kamala Harris.
Black men, 30,000.
Over 50,000 black men.
53,000 registered.
And they raised a little bit more.
Far more than $1 million.
And the brothers got on the phone and raised $1.1 million.
Daniel Carter and myself, we were on the call, and many of you brothers as well. We got up to about 1.3 million.
Raised $1.3 million.
Over $1.3 million.
They raised 1.5 million.
Then white women got on the call. White women. Somebody say white women.
White women got on the phone.
White women for Kamala Harris.
Next thing I know, white women had a call.
Karens for Kamala.
Their goal was to push white women to recognize their privilege and the way they have frequently failed to use it as political capital.
The white women broke records for the largest Zoom call in the world. 164,000 got on that call.
150,000 participants raised over $8 million.
164,000 white women broke Zoom and raised over $8.5 million.
And white women almost tripled and doubled the giving.
Over 200,000 that raised $8 million.
They raised $8 million in 2 hours. Y'all still ain't shouting yet.
These white women raised $8.5 million. Then you had other folk.
And then the other folk came along.
It expanded to include South Asians and queer individuals and Latinas and Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, all mobilizing to generate significant funds and volunteers for Harris. And then, oh my God.
Faith leaders for Kamala Harris, Hispanics for Kamala Harris.
The Latino women's call and white men call.
White men had a call. LGBTQIA had a call.
And white men for Kamala Harris, which are meeting tomorrow.
There are 10,000 expected to be on the call. White dudes for Harris.
Then Melinda Gates said, look at what it is that is happening. This is the hour for the woman. And she wired $37 million.
Bill Gates' wife just wired $37 million in support of Kamala Harris.
She has raised a total $81 million already that first week.
The vice president raising over $100 million in less than 48 hours.
$126 million.
I want the phone number to their fundraising manager. Amen. I want to let them know, we got a debt liquidation project going on over here at the church. Amen. We don't need to raise $100 million in 24 hours. We'll take 10%.
I just heard today that she's raised over $200 million in 1 week.
More money in 1 week than anyone who has ever run for an office.
All of them who participated said that I believe in the idea. I believe in the vision. I want to sow in a person I believe can make a difference.
Many people gave $19.08 to commemorate 1908, the year the AKAs were founded on the campus of Howard University, and because she's an AKA.
A record $100 million donated in just 24 hours, 62% of that coming from first-time contributors.
From last Sunday to this Sunday, over $200 million have rolled in, 3/4 from first-time donors. I know Elon Musk, he's donating $40 million a month to the GOP campaign, but he's only one vote. I'll take $20 voters versus $40 million voters every day of the week. That's vote, 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 vote. Woo!
So look, we put Biden in office. I'm just saying, let's do it again, y'all. Let's do it again, because what's our option? It ain't one. So let's go ahead and do what we got to do to make what we got to do to protect our democracy and everything that's going on, because somebody's crazy, and we're just going to leave it at that.
Weird, huh? What do you think about that? It's got the same energy as this compilation from Deadspin of news stations across the country reciting the same exact script, word for word.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest
responsibility
is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about troubling and irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
Plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Well, that's going to do it for me. What'll it be next time? We'll see. For now, go and be the salt and light you are meant to be, and we'll see you next time on We the Free. Thanks for watching today. Listen, I want to make sure that you stay informed on the news and the biblical response to it, so do yourself and us a favor and hit the subscribe button before you go. And then we would love for you to check out WeTheFreeShow.com to grab yourself some merch to spread the word about We the Free. And we're also going to put a video on the screen that we think you'll like. Now, go and be that salt and light, and we'll see you next time.